Welcome, everyone. This is Our Travel Experiences. I'm your host, Kyle Rasmussen, and today I have with me Laura. Laura, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. I'm very excited to talk with you about your travels and the trips that you lead people on. I was looking through your website before jumping on here, and looks like you have some amazing trips coming up. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about those.
Yeah, I'm excited to share.
Awesome. So, just kind of start, give us a little background on kind of how you fell in love with travel and how you started in this industry of designing and leading people on group trips.
Yeah, I mean, I always traveled as a kid. I was, fortunate to have parents that traveled, and so started traveling when I was really young. I started speaking Spanish or learning Spanish when I was 11, and that's something I continued throughout high school and college. I ended up with a Spanish degree, so I think that has really been the backbone of my interest in travel. I studied abroad in Spain in college, and then after I was graduated from college, I went back to Spain and got my TOEFL to teach English as a second language. And so I think through that, like I really learned a lot more about other cultures, and that just kind of continued to fuel my interest. But I just did travel for fun, like most people do. I spent 14 years working in higher education at a college as a director, and it really wasn't until I guess two things. One, I got a divorce about 6 years ago, and in the process of doing that, as many people do when they get a divorce and try to kind of find themselves again, I just realized that I hadn't been traveling the way that I wanted to. And I wanted to make sure that I made travel a priority for myself post divorce. And so I started traveling pretty much anytime I had vacation or holidays, maximizing all of my time off of work, but going to places that people don't typically go to. So I went to Turkey, I went to Colombia, I did my first like official solo trip to Australia where I went for like 11 days by myself, and I loved doing it. But I also found, being at the time I was in my late 30s, I'm 40 now, but as a single woman who doesn't have a partner and I don't have kids, like it was really hard to find people to travel with me. I didn't really, I was happy I did the solo trip, but it wasn't my favorite way to travel. And so I was happy I did it. I think everyone should experience solo travel, but I found it to be also be really, really lonely to be by myself. And so, I wanted to find more people to travel with, but it was just such a struggle to find, friends that could get the same time off of work, who could afford it, who were willing to leave their partner or their children behind. And so it really wasn't until COVID happened, when I couldn't travel at all, and travel was kind of taken away from all of us, that I realized like how important it was to me. And I did a trip to Colombia during the pandemic. Once things started to kind of clear up and vaccines were available, I started traveling as much as I could, and I realized that I there was kind of something more to like what I was doing, and that other people could benefit from the same things that I was looking for, which is really like authentic, intentional travel to places that maybe aren't as popular, and also, having it done for you and having people to travel with, especially as a woman. There's a lot of places out in the world that I feel like people want to go to, but are maybe scared to go to on their own, or
Yeah.
just maybe lots of misconceptions about places like Colombia and Cuba and Morocco. And so I basically had this idea of making this into a business where I would design the trips and do all the research and vet the destinations for people, and then go back with a group so that people really could just kind of show up, but also have these experiences that go beyond, all inclusives and cruise ships and all these popular locations that people typically go to.
hmm Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how it started. I started my business in 2021, so approaching 2 years now. I initially wasn't planning to do it full time. I was just going to kind of try to keep my regular job and do this on the side. And I very quickly realized that it was kind of a one or the other ordeal. And so I quit my job in October of 2021. And my first group trip was like a week later to Mexico City. I had four women on it. And I kind of just did it. I put in my 30 days notice, and I only had that one trip planned at the time. And I just kind of went all in on making it work.
What was it like finally taking that leap and going with this travel dream full time?
I mean, it was exciting, but also terrifying. It's
Yeah.
probably the most terrifying decision I have ever made to, I mean, I literally remember like it took me probably 2 hours to send my resignation email. I was like sitting in my office at night with my hand like literally hovering over the send button because I was just terrified to make that it's like I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't want to actually like pull the trigger on it. But once I did, once the decision was kind of made, it was a sense of relief. It was not an easy decision and it wasn't an easy start and it's still a challenge, but definitely have come a long way in the last, year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah. How many trips do you typically lead per year, or have you so far?
That continues to increase, but I would say right now I probably have like 7 to 8 a year. It just kind of depends. It's continuing to grow as my business grows and as I add on more people to help me. I'm looking to hire some trip leaders so that we can do more of them, but I would say about 8 a year.
Okay. Yeah. What was it like that first trip, and compared to maybe the last one that you've done, the most recent one?
Yeah, I mean, so for comparison, my first trip was to Mexico City for Day of the Dead. I had 4 women on it. They were all my friends. They didn't know each other, but I knew all of them. And the trip itself, I would say, is for the most part the same as it was in the beginning. This October, I'll be going back for the third time with my groups. So, it continues to get better every time because we refine things and tweak things and change them. But my first trip was 4 people, and I struggled to find those four. I wanted to have 10, and I could only find four, and I felt like a failure to be honest, because everyone has this idea when you start a business that you're just gonna immediately be successful, and that's just not really realistic. So I would say
Yeah.
I had maybe some unrealistic expectations of how things would start. And so the second time I launched my Mexico City trip, though, it filled up within, I would say, a month, and I had 14 people on it. It sold out pretty quickly, and
Wow.
now that trip sells out like again, like pretty much right away. I don't really have any issues finding people to go on it. It's one that there's usually a wait list for now, and it always sells out. So
Wow.
it kind of just shows like how things start and the progression. Like I think people often see someone else's success and they think that it just happened super easily and overnight, and that's just not the case for me. My first
Yeah.
Mexico City trip was 4 people. My second one was Turkey and that was 6 people. My third one was Vancouver, Canada, and that was 8 people. And then my next one was Colombia, and that was 10 people. And then came full circle a year later to Mexico City, and that was 14. And so it really has taken time. It took a whole year for me to be able to like fully sell out a trip and have like a full trip. Um,
Hmm.
and and sometimes I still don't have full trips, but usually at this point they sell out fairly quickly. I know my Morocco trip I just um, opened up for April of 2024, it filled before I could even launch it. So
Wow.
people who are on my wait list are probably like, what happened to that trip? I'm looking to open a second one because I had so many people contact me, like just offering to like put down deposits to book it before it ever even opened. So some trips are definitely in higher demand and more popular than others.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a journey. And I mean, it's got to feel good now having it sold out before you even put it up there.
Yeah, and that certainly doesn't happen every time. I definitely have big wins like that, and I also have lots of things that don't go well. So it's not like it's all a success. But my Cuba trip that I launched for New Year's this December, that one sold out in 33 minutes when I opened it. So like I've had a few of those where it's just like the demand is there and the people are interested, and then sometimes I have other ones that take more time to fill or don't fill entirely. So I'm still
Hmm.
kind of learning like what people are wanting and like when they're wanting to go. I think when trips are offered makes a huge difference. Time of year, what country we're going to. Some
Yeah.
are definitely more popular than others. So sometimes I retire my trips temporarily and give them kind of a break to make more demand and then bring them back when I feel like people are interested in going there again.
Hmm. Yeah. So how'd you said Morocco, Cuba, Mexico City, Turkey. How'd you decide on these places?
They are all places that I personally was just interested in going to. I tend to personally just like more off the beaten path travel to places that don't always get the tourism. Some of those places I think like have become more popular. I know Mexico City. I've seen a huge difference in Mexico City in the last 3 years since I went there to now. I feel like it's become very popular. But 3 years ago, Mexico City was a scary place for people. A lot of people thought it was dangerous. I think there was a lot of like negative perceptions about places that are like inland Mexico, when in
Hmm.
reality, a lot of people go to Cancun and then or Tulum. And I would argue that there's just as many, if not more, issues in some of those like tourist beach
Yeah.
destinations. But these places get these stereotypes, and I would always get that too. And I would say like, "Oh, I'm going to Turkey." People are like, "What? Like, why would you go to a place like Turkey?" And I think it's just a lack of understanding from a lot of people. They just don't know what they don't know. They think Turkey's like a war zone. They think it's dangerous. And I've been to Turkey several times and I've really never experienced any issues in any of these places that I've gone to. And
Mhm.
so, as I personally was just gravitating towards these places, I kind of made it my mission to show people what it's like to travel to these countries and promote really like avoiding over tourism and giving places a chance that aren't, Paris and London and the places that people generally like think they want to go to just because it's kind of all they know.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I love that. That's something, when I saw you on Instagram, I was like, oh, that's really fascinating. Because these are, maybe lesser known places, but I think, they're more rewarding trips in a way because it is a little bit harder to get to these places, and get to experience them. But, I think it's a different experience that I think really impacts you in a different way than going to a place like Paris that is so so well known and so easy to get to and get around kind of place.
Yeah, and I think I'm really all about like avoiding over tourism and giving back to places that really need tourism and making sure that your tourism dollars are going to the places that you are visiting. And I just personally I was just talking to somebody about this earlier today that when I traveled during the pandemic, a lot of people thought you couldn't travel at all, but as things started to open up, like you still could travel. And I always felt like I was the only person in these countries. Like I go to Colombia and there were no Americans, nobody was speaking English. It was just me and Colombian people. And there, to me, there's nothing more authentic than that. You go to
Hmm.
some of these other places and I always pick on Paris. I'm actually going there for a day this fall, just to experience it. But you go to some of these other places and you're not experiencing like the true country that you're in often because you're surrounded by tons of other tourists. You're waiting in line. They're gouging prices and charging you way more than they should. You're not even experiencing sometimes the authenticity of the country that you're in because you're kind of in a bubble when you're in a place like that. And it's
Hmm.
not to say that like France is a bad country to visit. France is beautiful and there's tons of things to see there, but people tend to kind of just pick the big well-known cities and um, don't gravitate off the beaten path as much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's a good. I think that's where having someone like you to lead a group, you can help kind of navigate into those lesser, off the beaten path kind of places.
Yeah, for sure. And it can be scary. I know a lot of people always ask me, like, aren't you scared? And I'm not scared, but I understand why people are, and I understand why they have concerns and hesitations. And often, like I said, when you tell your friends and family where you're going, they're going to react in some kind of way and be like, oh my gosh, isn't that unsafe? Or, people can really like get in your head and try to talk you out of doing things. And so going with someone like me where I've been there before, I don't take people to places I haven't been myself, that I haven't experienced and kind of vetted, but going with someone like me who's been there and experienced it and understands the culture and the currency and the language. In some cases I'm fluent in Spanish, and then I also go with, I have a local partner that I work with, so I'm going with a travel company behind the scenes that's in that country. So we usually have a local guide with us who does speak the language, a driver. So we're doing it in a really safe way by doing it in a group, just because there is safety in numbers, of course.
Hmm.
And also just being with an expert, not only just me, but a person who is a local, who understands the language and all the things that you need to navigate in another country. It makes it so much simpler. So it really
Yeah.
is a great way to experience something different, but not have to put in all the research and the work that it takes to do that.
Definitely. Yeah, it's nice to just be able to show up and just enjoy the trip, not have to worry about all the hassle behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I always tell people travel can be really stressful, like just the planning part
Hmm.
of travel. I spend like hundreds of hours planning trips, and it takes a lot of research to put everything together, and that can really intimidate people to the point where they're like, okay, I'm just going to go to Mexico again because that's just easy and it's what I know. And I've
Yeah.
done that myself in the past too, where I just go with what I've done before. But when you continue to just do what you've done before, you really miss out on the whole world out there. And so I
Hmm.
really encourage people to find a way to go somewhere different instead of just repeating the same things that you've done before. And when you're the other thing with travel is like while you're traveling, even like the most thought out trip can become stressful just by having to make decisions of how to get places and where to eat. And it becomes kind of decision overload and decision fatigue at some point. And I
Yeah.
experience that myself too when I'm traveling, where I'm just like, I don't want to eat out anymore. I don't want to make any more decisions. I don't want to figure out how to get from point A to point B. It just feels like too much work. Like your brain gets exhausted from making decisions. And this really eliminates all of the decision making. So you can just kind of submit to the process and, let people trust that someone's going to take you to really great places.
hmm Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, going, looking at the planning side of things, personally, I think that, doing some of that research and challenging yourself to go somewhere that's, not just, the resort in Mexico, but going to a place that's a little bit scarier, a little bit, you know, harder to get to or a little bit harder to navigate. I think that challenge helps you really grow as a person too, and makes it a really worthwhile experience.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like the most impactful experiences in my life have not been the easy ones. And so I think it's okay if travel is scary sometimes, or it's not always pretty. It's not always happy, even to some of these places that we go. You're not always seeing happy things. And I think that's all part of the experience too, because that's the reality of it. When you go to an all inclusive and you're just sitting on a beach and, kind of again in that bubble, there's nothing wrong with that. But are you even experiencing what's happening like outside the gated community that you're in?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. So what is it like? I mean, I gotta imagine the logistics of planning a group trip, of designing it, of getting, 14 people together on a trip and making sure they get home safe kind of thing. I imagine it's a lot of work.
It is, yeah. I think always people always say, "Oh my God, your life is so amazing. Like I want to be you." And I'm like, I don't think you probably do. Um, it certainly like looks, it looks amazing from the outside, and I guess that's essentially the goal. Like it is amazing for the people on it, but for me, it is my job, and it is a ton of work. From the beginning stages, like right now, my new group trip that I just announced is Greece, and so right now I'm in the planning stages of my own Greece trip for this September. I've partnered up with a local organization that has kind of the same mission and values of me as my company, and making sure that we're giving tourism to places that isn't just Santorini and Mykonos, for example. Like we've already agreed we're not going there. That's not an option. We're going to support other places in Greece that people should see. But going through that process of figuring out myself where I'm going to go and like where am I going to stay, and then where's my group going to stay, and what are we going to eat, and what are we going to do. I have to go there. I have to experience it all myself. Go there to get content and photos and videos, so then I can come back and market it to people and sell it, and then people book the trip, and then it's preparing them for their own trip. So making sure they know like how to get flights and how to get there on time. And then, making payments along the way. I'm following up with every single person when they have questions. So I'm kind of in constant communication with all of the people on my groups.
Mhm.
And then about a month before the trip starts, we do an orientation call on Zoom where everybody gets to meet each other. I go through an orientation packet and kind of give them like the whole overview of the trip, give them like safety tips for the country we're visiting, tell them about like currency and what to pack and really like over preparing them for everything that they might experience on these trips. And that can be more challenging for some countries versus others. Like, for example, Cuba takes a lot more preparation for people because it's not a typical place to travel, and there's just a lot more logistics and things that people need to understand. Like, you can't buy anything in Cuba, so you need to bring everything you need. I was just in Cuba in March, and one of the guys I was with was, I think he brought forgot to bring deodorant, and he kind of just assumed that when he got there he'd be able to buy some, which is a very normal thought anywhere else in the world, but in Cuba, like, that's not an option.
Hmm.
So people need to understand they can't use credit cards in Cuba. You can't take money out of an ATM. So you need to come there with all the cash you need, because if you don't, you run out of money, like, you really have no option. So people aren't going to be like wiring you money to Cuba if you run out. So there's just so many things like that that I have to prepare people for. And it's a lot of pressure, like knowing that everyone's kind of relying on you to tell them absolutely everything.
Hmm. Yeah, and then you do tell them everything, and then they still don't listen
Yeah.
sometimes. And then you got to take care of.
Yeah. Yeah, and things go wrong and people forget things, and people, despite how many times you tell them, I've had people miss flights and have to like find the group later, and people, forget to bring things, or people get sick, and so I have to bring extra medications and things like that, especially to places like Cuba where I can't just run into a pharmacy if someone on my trip gets sick. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's really like over preparing my groups and myself for anything that could go wrong, because things do go wrong. The most perfectly planned trip can still go wrong. I've had things where, like, the weather doesn't cooperate and we need to kind of change course for the day, or we have to make shifts in the schedule or the itinerary, and that's just kind of how it goes. So you have to always be thinking on your feet and ready to problem solve at any given time. I always equate it to like being like a wedding planner, except the wedding is in a foreign country and there's like 14 brides and it goes for 10 days. Because that's really my job, is to make sure that everything is going smoothly for everybody else on the trip so that they're enjoying their trip. I'm not on vacation, I'm working.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about Cuba and your own Cuba trip that you run.
Yeah, so this will be my first official Cuba trip. I have two of them happening over New Year's and then the first week of January. I myself went to Cuba for the first time in March to scout it out and experience it for myself. And I'm super excited to be bringing a couple of groups back, because Cuba is a really misunderstood place, and I think
Mhm.
a very challenging place to travel to. So I think a lot of people, usually when I say I'm going to Cuba, they're like, I thought we couldn't go to Cuba. And that's a complicated answer, because you can go to Cuba, but you can't go as a tourist. You have to go under an approved visa for one of the many reasons that you can go to Cuba, but tourism isn't one of them. So you can't go to Cuba and just sit on a beach and sip mojitos. You have to go there with intention of giving back to the Cuban people and supporting them. And you have to stay in specific accommodations. You have to have kind of a full itinerary of activities that are supporting the Cuban people. There's certain restaurants you can't eat in. There's all kinds of rules that go with that. And I think that intimidates a lot of people. And so then they kind of just steer away from it. But Cuba is such an impactful place to visit, and they need the tourism probably just as much, if not more, than most countries. And because it's so complicated for Americans to go there, I think we just avoid it. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited that we're going, because we're going to be giving back through our trip. We're going to be bringing donations and supplies over to the Cuban people, having a pig roast with some locals and donating supplies. So it's going to be really, really cool. We're going to Vinales. We're going to be out in the tobacco farms and seeing how people make cigars, and doing all kinds of really cool, fun activities.
That sounds like a blast. I had the opportunity to go to Cuba back in February, I believe, this year, and yeah, I totally understand everything that you're saying. It's definitely a complicated country to get into and out of, but and navigate. But man, I gotta say that's probably one of the most rewarding travels I've ever had. It was really fascinating. I loved learning from the Cuban people, getting their perspective and point of view on everything, and just learning how they live their lives. It's really fascinating, and there's so much there that that you never hear about.
No.
yeah,
No, yeah,
there's so much more to it than what we hear here.
for sure. And I don't think, I mean, I understood to an extent the dynamic of Cuba and the United States, but I learned so much more being there, like you said, and hearing their side of it and their experiences, because we really are so shielded from what's happening in Cuba because of the embargo with the United States and just the dynamics between our two countries. And one example I always give is like when like last fall, we had Hurricane Ian hit the East Coast of the United States, and I was traveling at the time actually, and was on my way to a music festival that got canceled, and so I was kind of in the hurricane, not in the bad parts of Florida, but I was still close enough to it that I experienced it weather wise and had my whole trip canceled. But all we heard about was Florida. Everything was about Florida. And don't get me wrong, like Florida got devastated and it's super tragic, but Cuba got devastated too. And when I got to Cuba, I remember looking across the street and I was like, why does that house not have a roof? And they were like, well, that's from the hurricane. And I was like, what hurricane? And they're like, Hurricane Ian. And then I was kind of like, oh, duh. Like, obviously, Cuba is so close to Florida. Why would it have not hit Cuba? But that was never on TV. You never heard it in the news. Nobody talked about the devastating impacts of Cuba. It was all about what happened in Florida. And
Mhm.
in Florida, like, they'll be able to recover. Some of these people in Cuba will never recover, or their houses won't have a roof on it for 10 years potentially while they wait to get somebody to come and fix it. So they
Yeah.
have like plastic, they have plastic over the top of their roof while they wait. And I was told it could take like 5 to 10 years before they get it replaced because they're just waiting one by one for the government to come around and fix it for them. So I don't know. It's just very eye opening to think like I thought I knew to an extent, and I feel like I knew very little until I was actually there and experiencing it for myself.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's one reason why people should travel. Is you get to see a place for how it really is. You get to learn from the people who actually live there what life is actually like. It's not there's so much more to it than just the brief snippet that we get. Or even, we don't even hear about, a lot of these places at all.
Yeah, and it's totally different to be there and hear, like you said, hear a person telling you their personal experience. I know we had coffee with a journalist while I was in Cuba, and she told us about like her own experience living in Cuba and how things have changed from like when Trump was in office and versus Obama, and how things really opened up for the Cuban people. Very literally, like their lives opened up when Obama was in office, and he opened up tourism because she said she was able to buy a house during that time that she never would have been able to do otherwise. And now we've taken some steps back, unfortunately, and that's affected them. But at least during that time, they were able to get Airbnb. So they've been able to open up their homes as casas for tourism. They've been able to do Airbnb experiences. They didn't have that ability before, and so it's just really interesting to like hear their firsthand experiences. I had a driver who he was asking me about like where I've traveled to, and I was telling him, and he was just telling me how he'll never leave. He's never left Cuba, and he never will. Like he'll never be able to leave his country because he doesn't have basically the passport privilege that we do. And so it's just
Hmm.
really eye opening to realize like some of these people will never have the ability to leave their own country. And it's so easy for us to get a passport, and yet so many of us still don't have them, and still have never left the United States. And
Yeah.
not because we can't, but because a lot of people just don't want to.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of sad. I think there's so many missed opportunities for a lot of Americans. Some don't have the means to be able to travel, but so many do and just don't take advantage of it. And I think uh, don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, but I think it can,
Yeah,
it negatively affects us. I think we could, have more positivity and happiness and bring back, different ideas by traveling around the world.
for sure. I think it definitely humbles you to experience other ways of living, and especially in a place like Cuba, it just makes you realize like these people can be happy with so much less than we have. And the
Hmm.
things that we worry about and complain about sometimes seem kind of trivial in comparison to what other people are dealing with.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I know one thing that really impacted me is when I went to Guatemala and, seeing these people who had literally nothing. I mean, they lived in a small little, thing, four walls and a roof and a dirt floor, and that was it. And wore the same clothes every day, and they were the happiest people that I ever met. Um,
Yeah,
they're worried about survival every single day, and we're here complaining about, oh, I don't have the newest iPhone, or the newest nicest thing, or whatever it is.
yeah,
It's
for
just
sure. It's in Morocco, we go to the Sahara Desert, and I always take my groups to visit the nomads in the desert. And
nice.
the nomads move around and they have these basically like little huts that they build. They're not even permanent structures, and it's like a one room. They're sleeping on the floor. You know, but you can tell that they've pieced everything together from what they've gotten from other people, obviously. And their way of living is so simple, and yet they don't seem like unhappy people. So it's just a very humbling experience to see how other people live and what they have and they don't have.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I really like that your trips are designed to be very cultural, immersive, as you say. How'd you end up deciding to do that? And I would guess, does that take a little bit more logistical challenge to find some of those more immersive places?
Yeah, it's definitely harder. Like I said, it's something I always did personally when I would do my own trips. I would always make sure that I'm doing it's just what I prefer to do. When I went to Turkey before I ever had a travel company, I went to like a Turkish family's home and I cooked dinner with them. And those are just things that I like naturally wanted to do. And I found those experiences to be the most rewarding versus, going on like a city tour, which I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but I just don't feel like looking at sites and monuments has the same type of impact as cooking a meal with Turkish people and learning about their ways of living and just like learning how they cook and experiencing a meal with them. Like it's just
Yeah.
such a different type of experience. And so I wanted to make sure that my groups could do that too. And that is hard because, it's hard to bring 12 people into somebody's home. That's not always possible. But like, for example, in Morocco, we had a meal at a Moroccan family's home. They cooked a meal for us. My group got to talk to them about their lives, got to learn about their food. They got to have tea with them, and they taught them how to dance and played music. And those things don't just happen. Like it's hard to find those types of experiences online, even if you do like Airbnb experiences or Viator. Like a lot of these things don't exist on those platforms. These are things that happen when you have connections with the locals in those countries. And so when I partner with whoever I'm working with in these countries, I make a point of right off the bat telling them like this is what the mission is of my company, and these are the types of things that I like my groups to be able to do. And I ask them for ideas, and usually they have things that they come up with that we can do with the groups that make them feel like they're really getting like an inside view on what it's like to live in that country. Otherwise, I
Mhm.
feel like it's so easy to skim the surface when you visit some of these places and just kind of go to the tourist stops because that's what you find when you Google. If you say like best 10 things to do in Turkey, you're going to get probably all the same things. And I try to look beyond that and do something that's we might do some of those things, but I try to make sure that we're doing some things that people wouldn't normally do when they're traveling. But
Mhm.
the mission of my business has really evolved. I've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and I will say it's become more clear. And I think that's just because when you start a business, you just go and you don't have it all figured out. And so it's taken me time to kind of get my messaging down and to realize what I want to do through these trips. And it's been through trial and error and realizing like, at the beginning there are some things I did. I was like, okay, that's too touristy. Like I don't want to be doing those types of things. Like that's not what I kind of stand behind. So and the giving back part of it has evolved as well. Like that was harder to do when I first started because I didn't have the means to be giving back through my own business when I was, just starting. So
Hmm.
now, I'm like, I joined 1% for the planet. And so like 1% of my proceeds go to organizations around the world that support the environment. And I'm part of the Transformational Travel Council. And, all of these things that have taken time for me to get involved in because they cost me money to participate in so that my business can give back as well. So it's just been something that really has slowly evolved. But I'd say in the last like 6 months to the last year, it's become much more clear to me like what type of experiences I want to stand behind and what type of travel I just don't really support.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm sure, uh, over the years, your travel and how you want to travel has changed as well.
For sure. And I'm still learning too. And the more educated I become about the impacts that travel has on the world. Like I've certainly looked back and I'm like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have done that, or that probably wasn't like a company I should have supported, or an experience that I should have done. I've learned that too, and so I'm constantly learning and educating myself. But I always talk about like I don't know if you've seen The Last Tourist,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
but I encourage everybody to watch that documentary because it will make you look at travel in a different way, or at least should. Because I'm sure everybody can watch that and look back on something you've done and realize, like, oh, that probably wasn't the best decision, but I just didn't know what I didn't know.
Hmm.
Um, Cruise ships, like, people have no idea what negative impact cruise ships have on the environment, on the countries that you're visiting. Um, I think a lot of people just have no idea because that's not something that's really talked about a whole lot. But I do think it's important for people to educate themselves on the impact that travel has on the places that they're visiting.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of as I started traveling more and more over the years, I was realizing, not only is, flying around the world, not probably the best for the environment, and there's a lot of things that I think I'm taking as I'm traveling. I feel like that's part of the reason why I started this podcast and started, doing all these other things to share travel with others and share some of this with people because I want to give back and kind of help replenish that what I've taken through those travels
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah, and I think we are naturally like, I think when people think of vacation, they think it's all about them and it's their time that they've earned. And that is true. But there are so many ways to also give back while you're traveling that
Hmm.
sometimes don't take a ton of effort or money. Sometimes you can do really small things and make small changes to your travel that have a much bigger impact. And I think people should consider that when they're picking their next place that they're going to.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, so I'm curious, what through the trips that you've led, what have been maybe one or two of the most rewarding moments or experiences that you've had?
Um, oh gosh. Um, when I did my Turkey trip last year, we did this like Jeep safari in Antalya, and honestly, I hadn't done it before. It was one of the only things on my trip that I hadn't already experienced myself. And so I was a little concerned it was going to be this, like, again, really touristy, kind of corny experience. And I was a little worried that, I wasn't going to be happy about it at the end of the day. And so we went on it, and it was honestly one of the best days of my life because we went out into the mountains in Antalya and it was absolutely beautiful. We had like 6 or 7 Jeeps full of people, but the people were from all over the world. So we had people from Latin America, we had people from all over Europe, and everyone was in their own little groups. And what we didn't realize was that they actually had it basically planned to be a all day water fight. And so like under our seats they had like water bottles, empty water bottles, and we stopped and all of a sudden like they started spraying us with water and we were like, what the hell? Because we thought we were just like out on a Jeep safari. And then like little did we know, like they have all these stops built in where you go out and you fill up your water bottles, and we basically just started like throwing water at strangers, which sounds kind of crazy. But we got to know like all these people from all over the world. We had like, I can't even remember what countries, but there was like countries from the Middle East. It was like people you never would have expected to be like chucking water at you. And it was seriously the most fun. Like we were all completely invested in this water fight. And by the end of the day, I was just like, this is one of the coolest things I have ever done. Not just because we're in Jeeps in Antalya or we're having a water fight, but because like it was such a eye-opening experience of like we are all different but we are all the same. Like at the end of the day everybody just wanted to have fun and nobody cared where anyone was from or how different we were. It was just so much fun to do that experience with such a diverse group of people. It was like mind-blowing for me. I will literally never forget that day.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, and I think that's a great example of how travel can really bring the world together. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That
for
sounds like
sure.
fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm working on another Cuba trip for next year, so we'll see if we get the water fight back in. But I got to kind of keep it a secret because that's kind of part of the fun.
Yeah. What's maybe been some challenges that you faced along the way with your trips, and have you overcame those?
I think it marketing and advertising is super super hard when you start a new business and just getting the word out. So, like I said, when I started, I had 4 people on my first trip, and that was a very humbling experience when I first started to realize like, oh, this isn't going to just be easy. Like this isn't just going to like I'm not going to just put out a Facebook post and all the people are going to come running. And so it has been challenging sometimes to fill trips. As much as I've had very successful ones, I've also had ones that don't fill, where people just really aren't interested in going to that place or they're not interested in traveling at that time. And it takes so much time to build a following. And I have Instagram, I have Facebook, I have a Facebook group for women, I have an email list. I am constantly trying to build my network so that when I advertise, people are actually seeing it and sharing it. And that has taken so much time. But I guess the most valuable thing really has been like as people have gone on these trips, they share with other people. And so the word spreads and people give good feedback and tell their friends and tell their family and more people follow me. And that has really, really been helpful to have like those testimonials and repeat clients who have come back to go on multiple trips. I have one woman who she's coming to Cuba with me this winter, and that will be her 5th trip with
Wow.
me in pretty much a year. I mean, our first trip together was last August, and we've been to 4 countries together. So she's like, I'm a lifer. I will be on every trip you offer. It's been really cool to have people like that. I have some that have been on like 3 or 4 trips with me, and I have people who are now like booking trips together to make sure that they're on the same trips together again. So I just got a text from one of the girls on one of my trips yesterday, and like 3 of the girls from my Vancouver trip last summer were meeting up in Michigan yesterday, and they were on a trip with their kids together, and they all met on one of my trips. So like those are just the things that really make it feel like it's worth it.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. That's got to feel really good. Um,
Yeah.
uh, so are they just for women, or can anyone go?
Most of them are co-ed. I do sometimes set aside specific trips for women just because I know there are women that want to only travel with other women, but my business is not just for women. I have most trips are co-ed. Sometimes I just get more women, and so then people think that all my trips are for women. Like, but like for example, my Morocco trip that just kind of sold out, like it pretty much was filling up with all women. I had maybe 2 spots left, so then I changed it to women only because I'm not gonna, it's kind of a weird dynamic when you have like 1 or 2 guys on a trip with 12 other women. I mean, the guys might not mind, but I'm usually careful to advertise it specifically, like this is women only or this is co-ed, so that women aren't signing up for co-ed trips and then being surprised when men are on it, and vice versa. So yeah, I try to do a good mix so that there are opportunities for men. I know both of my Cuba trips are co-ed. My Morocco trip, like I said, I have one women only, and I'm probably going to open a second one that will be co-ed. So it just kind of depends, but I definitely encourage men to travel, and I've had plenty of men on my trips, and I personally like having both genders. I think it offers a good, diversity.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I've been on those, you know, mainly guys, the guys trip, and then I've been on the co-ed, and then some that have been mainly women and only a couple guys, and it's definitely a different dynamic from each one. You're
Yeah,
getting
for sure.
different types of conversations and interactions and stuff like that for sure.
Yeah, and I tend to because I'm divorced myself, I tend to have a lot of divorced people on my trips. That just kind of happened accidentally as I shared my story. I had more divorced people following me and sharing, and um but I've had divorced men as well, and I actually was just with one of them yesterday, and he was like, "You need to make sure that like divorced men know that they can go on your trips because he this a lot of people like are using these as their divorce trips. It's like the first thing they
Mhm.
do after they get divorced and kind of becomes like that eat, pray, love experience for people. It
Yeah.
sounds kind of corny, but it's true. Like travel really is for me like the most healing thing you can do after your
Mhm.
divorce.
Yeah. I feel like it's a really good way to reset your mind a little bit.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be divorce. There's all kinds of reasons that people travel, but it is a great escape to kind of, like you said, reset and I don't know. I just feel like it kind of gives you different perspective when you come back home. You're like, okay, like everything's gonna be fine.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, Laura, any other advice you would have for people looking to travel, or any other tips or stories that you want to share?
Um, Not necessarily, but I will just say, like, I just tell people if you're scared of traveling, or you have hesitations, like, do it anyway.
Mhm.
Just because people travel doesn't mean that they're not scared or they're not nervous or they're not hesitating about traveling. So just do it. Like, make it happen, make a plan and make it happen. And worst case, if it's so intimidating that you don't think you can do it on your own, that's where I'm here. And you can always reach out to me and chat with me about your travel plans and see if a group trip is a good fit for you.
Yeah, I love it. And where can people reach out to you at or find you?
Yeah, my website is lauraerickson.com. I always tell people there's no K in my last name because otherwise it will take them to somebody else. So it's Ericson. And Instagram, I'm Lolo Whiskey. And then my Facebook group, which is for women only, is called Lolo Loves Travel. So women can send a request to join that group as well.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I saw your Instagram and your Facebook, or and your website, and honestly, very well done website. Instagram, you got some amazing pictures on there.
Oh,
But
thank
it was
you.
also just getting to see some of your pictures, learn a little bit about your story, and it's been fun chatting with you today about your travels and how you've really built a great business that benefits a lot of people, not just the travelers, but also the local people as well. I think that's really inspiring to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
Um, well, awesome, Laura. Thanks again for your time, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere around the world soon.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey everybody, Kyle here. If you enjoyed today's show and want more, you can always check out every episode on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, and now Amazon Music as well. Just search for Our Travel Experiences on any of those platforms and it will pop up. You can also find everything all in one place on my website, ourtravelexp.com. And if you want to see my travel pictures as well as travel pictures from guests on the show, you can check them out on Instagram. The page is called Our Travel Experiences Podcast. And if you want to share your own pictures on the Instagram page or be a guest on the podcast, you can message me via that Instagram page or email me at ourtravelexperiences@outlook.com. I would love to see your pictures and hear about your travel experiences, so please send them my way. And if that isn't enough for you, make sure to check out my weekly YouTube show, From Around the World Fridays. Every Friday, I'm taking 5 to 10 minutes to answer questions from listeners, share some souvenirs that I bought over the years, share my postcards over the years that I've accumulated, or share videos and pictures from one particular city or country that I visited, and so much more. So check it out, guys. You won't be disappointed. And make sure you go subscribe to that as well. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you somewhere around the world soon.